It was a bitterly cold night, the kind where the air bites at your skin, and the city's pulse slows to a cold, steady rhythm. The streets were almost empty, save for the occasional car sweeping past, headlights cutting through the darkness like blades. No one paid attention to the girl lying unconscious on the freezing pavement, her body barely covered by torn clothing, her face ghostly pale against the backdrop of the night. The faintest layer of snow began to gather around her, as though the world had forgotten she was even there. But then, as if the universe had decided that she deserved one final chance, a car pulled up. The black luxury vehicle slowed to a stop, the tires crunching over the wet road. The man behind the wheel, Alexander Montgomery, didn't even need a second glance to realize something was terribly wrong. He wasn't a man who did favors, didn't waste his time with the unfortunate or the weak. His world revolved around business, strategy, and the cold empire he had built over years of ruthless decisions. Empathy wasn't a part of his vocabulary. Yet tonight, something inside him shifted. Something made him stop. Stepping out of the car, Alexander's gaze swept over the girl, his face unreadable. She was no one to him, just another person on the street, another face in the crowd. And yet, as he knelt beside her, something inexplicable took hold of him. Without thinking, he scooped her up in his arms, her fragile form almost weightless against his broad chest. He didn't know why he did it. He didn't need to know why. All he knew was that he couldn't leave her there. Not like that. The cold didn't matter. His usually impenetrable mask of indifference cracked just a little. The drive to his mansion felt like an eternity. The stillness of the car almost suffocating. Alexander's mind raced with a million thoughts. What had he gotten himself into? This girl, this stranger, had no place in his life. But there she was, in his car, in his arms, on her way to his home. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't accustomed to feeling responsible for anyone, least of all someone so utterly lost, so fragile. The mansion, a towering structure that had always symbolized his isolation, now felt colder than ever. Was he really doing the right thing by bringing her here? As he entered the mansion, he quickly instructed his staff to prepare a guest room and get medical supplies. It wasn't that he cared, not really, but he couldn't deny the strange sense of responsibility that gnawed at him. She was unconscious, yes, but she was alive, and for some reason, that made all the difference. Hours passed, and finally the girl stirred. Her breathing steadied, and her eyelids fluttered open. She blinked, her vision blurry, and then focused on the room around her. She didn't speak at first. She couldn't. She was disoriented, confused. Her gaze finally landed on Alexander, who was standing by the door, watching her closely. He had no intention of staying in her space. He wasn't the type to offer comfort, but something about her presence unnerved him. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice soft and hoarse. She looked around the lavish room, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You're in my home," Alexander answered shortly, his voice as cold as always. He didn't bother with pleasantries. In his world, time was valuable, and emotions, especially the messy kind, were distractions. The girl's eyes narrowed as she took in her surroundings. The opulence of the mansion seemed foreign to her. She had never been in a place like this, never even imagined such luxury could exist, and yet here she was. A cold chill crept into her chest as she felt the weight of her vulnerability. This man, this billionaire who had saved her life, didn't feel like a savior. He felt like a stranger, an intimidating figure in a world she didn't belong in. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, the confusion still evident in her voice. Her eyes were filled with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. There was something about him, something about the way he looked at her, that unsettled her. She couldn't quite place it, but it made her uneasy. Alexander, who had grown used to being in control of everything around him, was caught off guard by her question. He wasn't used to explaining himself, let alone to someone like her. Why had he helped her? It wasn't like him. He wasn't a man who acted out of compassion. His life was about control, about ensuring that everything fit into place. But there was something about her, lying helpless on the street, that made him do the one thing he rarely ever did: take action. "I didn't want to leave you there," he said, his tone flat, almost devoid of emotion. "You were in danger." The girl eyed him for a moment, still processing his words. It was clear that she didn't fully trust him. She had spent her life surviving, learning how to navigate a world that had never been kind to her. People didn't help without wanting something in return, but for now, she was alive, and she couldn't turn away from that, so she nodded, though the doubt still lingered in her eyes. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alexander Montgomery," he said, his name falling from his lips with a casual indifference. He wasn't used to introducing himself. He wasn't used to being anything more than the man who controlled everything around him. But there was something in the way she looked at him that made him hesitate. He wasn't used to being seen, not in the way she saw him. She wasn't looking at him with admiration or fear. She was simply looking at him, as if trying to understand who he truly was. The days that followed were tense. Sophia, as she introduced herself, slowly regained strength, but her confusion about her past lingered. She didn't remember how she had ended up on the street or who had left her there to die. All she knew was that Alexander had pulled her from the edge of death and placed her in a world that felt like a dream. But dreams weren't real, and neither was this. Alexander's demeanor remained cold and distant, as it always had been. He never pressed her for answers, never demanded anything from her. But Sophia could feel it. Something was simmering beneath the surface. Something about her presence was shifting the very foundation of Alexander's world. It wasn't just that he had saved her. It was that he couldn't walk away, and that alone was enough to spark an unsettling sense of tension between them. Neither of them knew what would come next, but one thing was certain: their worlds were about to collide in ways neither of them could have imagined. But as the days went on, the questions only grew louder. Why had he saved her? What did he expect in return? And perhaps most importantly, why couldn't either of them shake the feeling that this was just the beginning? As the days passed, the tension between Alexander and Sophia only grew. He had brought her into his home out of some strange impulse, something he couldn't explain, even to himself. His mansion, once a sanctuary of solitude, had become a prison of questions and unspoken thoughts. Sophia, too, found herself struggling to understand the strange pull she felt toward this cold, distant man. He was nothing like the people she had known in her life: rich, powerful, and unapproachable. Yet she couldn't help but wonder why he had helped her. She was just a poor, nameless girl with no place in his world. Despite his aloofness, Alexander found himself constantly thinking about her. He had always lived by one rule: never get emotionally involved. His world was business, numbers, and power. It was a world that demanded control, and emotions had no place in it. But Sophia was different. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth, his cold demeanor, or his unapproachable persona. She didn't fear him, but she didn't trust him either. She had been abandoned by the world once, and she wasn't about to make herself vulnerable to someone who could so easily discard her. Sophia's memory remained fragmented. She had no recollection of how she ended up on the street that night. No memory of the events that led to her near-death experience. All she knew was that she had nothing left. Her past was a blur, a patchwork of vague images that never quite came together. She had never known luxury, never known what it felt like to be cared for. Alexander's mansion, with its marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and sprawling gardens, felt like a world out of reach. She wasn't sure if she belonged there, but every passing day brought her closer to the unsettling truth. She might never leave. There were moments when she caught Alexander, watching her, his sharp eyes studying her with an intensity that made her uneasy. He didn't say much, and when he did, his words were clipped, matter of fact. But there was something in the way he observed her that hinted at something deeper. It wasn't concern. It wasn't sympathy. It was something more complex, something she couldn't quite grasp. One evening, as she sat alone in the library, her fingers tracing the spine of an old book, she overheard a conversation that would change everything. She had grown used to the occasional whispered words between Alexander and his associates. But this time, it felt different. This time, she heard something that made her blood run cold. "We can't keep her here," a familiar voice said. It was the voice of one of Alexander's most trusted advisors, a man named Gregory. "She's a liability. She's a threat to everything you've worked for." "What do you mean?" Alexander's voice was low, his tone flat. "She's not a threat." "You don't understand," Gregory pressed, his voice rising slightly. "She doesn't remember who she is, but someone out there does. They'll come looking for her. They'll come for the girl, and when they do, it will bring everything crashing down." The words sent a shiver through Sophia's spine. Someone was looking for her. Who were they, and why? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the cryptic conversation. But before she could process it further, Alexander's voice cut through the air again, silencing all doubts. "I'll deal with it when the time comes," he said, his tone final, dismissive. "She stays." The conversation ended abruptly, but the fear that had settled in Sophia's chest refused to leave. Whoever these people were, they weren't just after her. They were after something bigger. And whatever it was connected to Alexander. Somehow, he was involved. The realization hit her hard. She wasn't just a poor girl he had picked off the street. She was part of something much larger, something dangerous. The following days were a blur of unease. Sophia tried to keep her distance from Alexander, her mind preoccupied with the conversation she had overheard. But despite her best efforts, their paths crossed more often than not. Each time, she could feel the weight of the secret between them. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but something held her back. She was afraid of what she might learn. And then, one night, everything changed. Sophia had gone to bed early, her mind too restless to sleep, when she heard a knock at her door. It was late, too late for anyone to be visiting. She hesitated for a moment before opening it, her heart racing in her chest. Standing in the doorway was Alexander, his usual stoic expression replaced by something unreadable. He looked different, more vulnerable, as if the weight of something had finally caught up with him. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low. Sophia stepped aside, allowing him into the room. As he entered, she could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. She didn't know what to expect, but she had a feeling that tonight would be different. Tonight, everything would change. "I overheard something," Sophia said, her voice shaking slightly. "Who are they? Who's after me?" Alexander stiffened, his eyes narrowing slightly. He took a step toward her, his gaze intense. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said, his voice almost a whisper. But you have to understand, there's more at play here than you realize. Your past, your identity, they're not what you think. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Her mind reeled with the weight of his words. What did he mean? What was her identity? Your life, Alexander continued, his voice strained, was never meant to be your own. You were part of something much bigger. And those people, they're looking for you because you're the key. You're the one thing that could change everything. The room seemed to close in on her. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. It all felt like it was pressing down on her. She couldn't breathe. The ground beneath her felt like it was shifting, as if she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the world was about to crumble beneath her feet. What do you mean? Sophia whispered, barely able to speak. But before Alexander could answer, a loud crash echoed through the mansion, the sound of glass shattering, a distant scream, and then the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approaching. The door. It was too late. The danger had arrived. Everything was about to come crashing down. The sound of shuffling footsteps grew louder, and Sophia's heart raced. Alexander's expression shifted, a rare flicker of emotion crossing his face. Panic. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw him genuinely afraid. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight and urgent. You need to leave. Now. His voice was sharp, his calm facade cracking. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. What's happening? Who are they? What did you mean? But before she could finish, the door to her room slammed open with a violent force, and in the doorway stood a group of men, dressed in dark, imposing suits. Their eyes were cold, predatory, like they had been hunting for her, and they were finally here. Sophia, one of the men said, his voice smooth but laced with threat. We've been looking for you. Alexander stepped between her and the intruders, his stance protective. Stay away from her, he warned, his voice low, yet commanding. The intensity in his gaze was something Sophia had never seen before. A mixture of determination and something deeper, more personal. You don't get to make the rules here anymore. The man replied, his smile cold. She belongs to us. Sophia was frozen. The words he spoke didn't make sense, yet she felt the truth in them. She wasn't just some poor girl anymore. She was a piece of a larger, darker puzzle. Alexander had known, and now she was finally seeing the depth of the game being played. Who are you? What do you want with me? Sophia's voice trembled, her mind racing to piece together the shattered fragments of her past. The man laughed softly, as if humoring a child. You don't remember, do you? You were part of something much bigger, a legacy, a bloodline. You were supposed to inherit everything, but they took that from you. Now it's time to take back what's rightfully yours. Sophia's head spun. What legacy? What bloodline? And why had Alexander kept her in the dark? Before she could process more, Alexander turned, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of regret and resolve. I couldn't tell you the truth. Not yet. It wasn't safe, but you deserve to know everything. He stepped forward, his voice now fierce. Sophia, you're not just some girl. You're the last heir to a powerful family, one that's been erased from history. And those people, they're here to make sure you don't reclaim what's yours. The words hit Sophia like a punch to the gut. She had no idea that her life had been stolen from her long ago, that her past, her true identity, had been hidden away from her in plain sight. The man you knew, the person who saved you, that was part of the plan. I had to keep you close, protect you until you were ready, Alexander continued. But I didn't count on this, on how much He stopped himself, shaking his head. His next words were barely a whisper. I didn't count on how much I would care. For a moment, there was silence. The truth hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating and overwhelming. Sophia's heart beat fast as she processed his confession. He had been lying to her, but not just for his own gain. He had protected her, kept her in the dark, but it was all for a reason. And then, everything changed. The men moved to grab her, but before they could make their move, Alexander stepped back, his eyes blazing with fury. No one is touching her, he growled, his voice low but full of authority. Suddenly he wasn't the cold, calculating billionaire she had known. He was someone else entirely. Someone who would fight for her. Someone who would burn the world to protect her. The men paused, hesitating, their leader now clearly weighing the situation. For a long moment, the room stood still, the air thick with tension. Sophia could feel her pulse in her ears, her breath shallow as she looked between Alexander and the intruders. I'll fight you all if I have to, Alexander declared, his voice unwavering. She's mine to protect, and no one will take her from me. The leader of the men exchanged a look with his associates, clearly sizing up Alexander. It was a standoff, one that could have easily ended in bloodshed. But then, without warning, the men began to back off. Slowly, one by one, they turned, their faces betraying a mix of disbelief and respect. You're making a mistake, the leader said, his voice cold. This isn't over. The game has just begun. With that, they left, vanishing into the night as quickly as they had arrived. Sophia stood frozen, her mind racing with questions. What just happened? Why had they backed down so easily? What was this game that had only just begun? And then Alexander turned to her. His eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw him fully. No walls, no cold exterior, just a man, someone who had risked everything to keep her safe. Sophia, he said, softly. The truth is, we're not just fighting for your past. We're fighting for your future. For everything that was taken from you. Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes as the weight of it all settled on her. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She had a purpose, a destiny. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice shaky but strong. I don't know if I can fight. Alexander stepped closer, taking her hands in his. You don't have to do it alone, he said, his voice full of conviction. I'll stand by you. Together, we'll take back what's ours. Sophia looked up at him, her heart pounding. She had no idea what the future held, or how deep this game went. But one thing was certain. Her life had changed forever. She wasn't the same girl she had been when she first woke up in his mansion. She had a new purpose. And with Alexander by her side, she was ready to fight for everything she had lost. The story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The stakes were higher than ever, and the truth would be revealed in time. But for now, Sophia knew one thing. She would never be the same. And neither would the cold billionaire who had saved her. Together, they would rewrite their fates. And in that moment, the future didn't seem so uncertain anymore.